looking at Donald Trump as a person, what are the main, problems when you look at him as a psychologist? Because we're many of us who are not familiar with this area and we don't have a clue what's going on with Donald Trump, and all of all the time we're asking ourselves what's going on with Donald Trump. He's changing his mind
Yeah. Right.
every 2 minutes. And what would you tell us about the personality of Donald Trump?
So there's three important things going on with Donald Trump. One is that he has this malignant narcissism, which really Eric Fromm defined it as the essence of evil. So it's actually the only diagnosis we have that really defines someone who is a monster. But as we started writing about back in 2019, he's also developing dementia or signs of dementia. And so this kind of going back and forth that you're talking about, when people develop dementia, whatever is bad about their personality, they become the worst versions of themselves. So whatever is bad about their personality becomes incredibly exaggerated. So he was always erratic and a disruptor and what have you. But now he's become more erratic and impulsive, and there's no sort of less of a rhyme or reason to it. So that's one of the reasons we see him just changing his mind so erratically, which is part of what makes him, I think, so dangerous, because a Donald Trump who is demented is even worse than a Donald Trump who is not. He literally seems to wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm going to put 100% tariffs on China. Or, for example, when he was going to be negotiating with the Prime Minister of Canada, Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, posted an ad on social media, which was a recording of Ronald Reagan, who was against tariffs, talking about how he was against tariffs. Well, that just enraged him over his cornflakes that morning, and he just decided to cancel his trade negotiations with Canada because somebody posted something on social media. That's the kind of, I think, what you're talking about. He's going back and forth in such an erratic way. How does another country even negotiate with someone like that?
Actually, many people are so confused. Mostly we are on this podcast. Mostly we are talking about the foreign policy of the United States, but when it comes to the relationship between the two, for example, you've mentioned China, the two superpowers talking to each other, and seeing Donald Trump every time he's talking, he's changing his position. It's so much damaging, to the foreign policy of the country.
Of course.
How is that going to be controlled by, I don't know, if there is somebody in Washington and a group of doctors talking to him, or maybe controlling this sort of behavior? Is that possible?
He is out of control, and there are no guardrails. That's one of the reasons he's so much more dangerous in this term than he was in the first. First of all, he's grossly deteriorated since the last term. Everyone who worked in the Trump administration has said he's not the same man. So first of all, he's melting down in terms of his cognitive faculties. But the other thing is, during his first administration, he appointed people who were serious people. They may have been aligned with him ideologically, but they were people who had experience in their departments, who had credentials. This time around, he made sure that one of the most important qualifications for being appointed by Donald Trump is that you're not qualified. I'm not saying that as a joke. I mean, it's really an actual criteria, because then you won't know that what he's telling you to do is illegal or against, decades of precedent or against the tenets of science. You just know that you have to be his flying monkey and you have to do his will, and that's your path to power. So the problem is he's got all of these yes men around him, and this kind of purge happens with dictators, right? I mean, you didn't really want to be Stalin's, minister of agriculture, because he killed the last 5 ministers of agriculture, right? So because they weren't radical or supine or true believing enough. And this is what Trump has done. He's been purging and purging and purging and purging, right? So you had someone like Bill Barr, who was willing to cover up the Mueller report, but then he wasn't willing to attack the election, right? So now he became his enemy. So now we have an Attorney General, Pam Bondi. I really don't think there is any criminal act that she will not perform on his behalf. That's the kind of person he needs working for him. And so the problem is those people are not going to be guardrails, and they're not going to be wise advisors. They're not going to be a restraining hand. So as this man is losing control of his faculties, he's gaining more control of the world, and there's no one around him trying to modulate those impulses.
You feel that this time around in the new administration, Trump 2.0, is that gonna? You've mentioned that those people who were in the first administration, they had some sort of experience in terms of what's going on in Washington. But today we have the head of Pentagon, for example. Literally he was working for Fox News, and right now he's the head of Pentagon.
Right, that's a good example.
Yeah, recently, I don't know if you saw that he was talking. He said that when he had a meeting with Xi Jinping, the president of the leader of China. He was talking, trying to communicate with his vice, and he was asking him something that he didn't answer. The vice president of China didn't answer to Donald Trump, and he said he looked at the JD Vance. He said, so you have to behave that way. Every time they're asking me something, you're jumping in and answering the questions. You, how, when it comes to this sort of, does he really want to dominate everything? Because it's impossible.
Everything.
No president can do that.
Right. Well, it reminds me of Mussolini. At one point, Mussolini held 5 cabinet positions in his own administration. I mean, that's very Trumpian. He made himself the head of the Kennedy Center. Who does that, right? I mean, that's crazy, right? That a president would make himself the head of the Kennedy Performing Arts Center. And now he's saying it should be renamed the Trump Kennedy Center. He wants to be, somebody... Theodore Roosevelt's son said he was the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral. He needed to be the center of attention. Well, Trump is that on steroids. So he wants to, when he's claiming he should win the Nobel Prize, which is crazy. Okay. And at one point he nominated himself for Pope. Do you remember that? He actually put out a social media meme where he's wearing the Pope hat and the whole outfit. And he literally said, well, I think I would be a good Pope. I mean, he wasn't kidding.
Yeah, that was amazing. Looking at Donald Trump, because the president of the United States, not only domestically, but in terms of the foreign policy, they're dealing with a lot of issues. And it's literally impossible for Donald Trump to handle all of that. You remember during the Biden administration, for example, we had we had the Secretary of State, we had the National Security Advisor, 2 different positions. Right now, both of them are, the same person. Is Marco Rubio is handling both. He's occupying both positions. But we know that Marco Rubio is somehow, every time Donald Trump is talking about something, he's just accepting what Donald Trump is talking about. Does it mean, when the United States in the Trump administration, in the second right now, doesn't have a national security advisor, one of the most important positions within the administration? What does that mean for you when you look at the administration?
Look, they are stripping and hollowing out every aspect of the government. I mean, they're firing everyone in the State Department. They're getting rid of the Department of Education. They're trying to basically encourage every federal worker to quit. They're trying to hollow out what they call the administrative state, because all of those things can be guardrails in their own ways, checks and balances. In fact, that's sort of the whole idea of the meritocracy. The fact that I think this happened in the Grant administration. Actually, it was Chester Arthur, I think, who started it. A civil service that was not based on spoils. It used to be based on spoils, or whichever side won got to divvy up jobs to their people, and said, no, it should be based on meritocracy. It should be freestanding. It should serve Republican and Democratic presidents, and it should be stable. It should be constant. But that's the problem, because they have rules and procedures and knowledge. And that's one of the reasons that he needs to neuter them, because that could be one more voice that could oppose his will. He's not interested in learning anything from anyone about anything. I don't know if you remember this in his first term. Someone said, "Well, who are your closest advisors?" And he said, "I'm my advisor. I'm my advisor. I'm my best advisor because I have a really great brain," which is not true. Actually, his brain is dementing, but that's his malignantly narcissistic attitude. Because the thing about malignant narcissists is their narcissism is almost to a psychotic degree. So he actually believes he knows everything about everything, right? Someone put together a supercut of, "I know more about the army than the generals. I know more about," so he mentioned like 25 different areas where he knew more than the experts in that area, which of course is impossible. But that's again his narcissism. What he wants is to be praised and for people to do his bidding without questioning it. And so that just means clearing the decks of anyone who has any expertise. And you're right to talk about Pete Hegseth. We used to love to make fun of him on our show. Not only does Pete Hegseth have no experience running the military or being in the military, not only was he a Fox News host, but we like to point out he was the weekend Fox and Friends news host. He wasn't even the A team among Fox and Friends, okay? And within Fox, everyone knew him to be a drunk. He was a drunk. He was constantly drunk on set, okay? And but he's a true believer. If you see him with his shirt off, he's got all these weird tattoos that are all these like Christian nationalist tattoos. So that's the point, is that he's a true believer in the white supremacist, mission. He's a psychopathic enough that he'll do and say anything. And he really has no actual qualifications or understanding of his job where he could disagree with Trump. And what Trump wants to do is make the military his own secret police. And with ICE, he's actually gone a very long way in doing that. And he's essentially already invading the cities. The very thing that the founding fathers were terrified of, that the U.S. military would be used against the country. Since Washington's time, we've had a culture that thinks of that as being total anathema. And yet he has violated that.
Yeah. Is Donald Trump, when you look at Donald Trump as a person he's a billionaire, he was the president of the United States, and then the second time after Joe Biden, he came to power again. What does he want from, it seems to me when he talks about Nobel Peace Prize, he sees as something that he couldn't conquer it. He wants to conquer everything, to show how successful he is as a person. How is that going to play out for someone like the president of the United States? Because we make jokes about Nobel Peace Prize, but it's tragic when you look at the president of the United States doing everything to win Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, he thinks he should win all the prizes. And so part of what he does is just lie about it. He said, "I stopped 8 wars." He didn't stop any wars. I mean, it's whole bullshit. And actually, when he talks about it, he gets the countries confused. He actually, talked about, "I made peace between Pakistan and Iran." Well, it's easy to make that mistake, right? Because Iran and India, they both start with I. This is sort of the level of his thinking. He does this a lot, where somebody asked him a question about his attacks on Harvard, and is that an attack on academic freedom? And it happened to be a black reporter who asked him if that's a factor. And then he went on and on to talk about Harlem, which is a neighborhood, in New York City, predominantly African-American neighborhood in New York City. So, "Oh yeah, the people in Harlem, yeah, they and thought, well, maybe he misunderstood the question. No, because then he circles around and says, and the people in Harlem, they love me and they approve of what we're doing at Harvard. So, I mean, that's the level of dementia we're talking about here. You say Harvard and he thinks about Harlem. He can't keep India and Iran straight. And when he was talking about Pakistan and India, he said, well, India, they've had a lot of regime changes. No, that was Pakistan. So now he can't keep the name straight. He can't keep the politics straight. So his is the person who has no advisors. He needs no advisors. He can't even keep the names of the countries straight.